You're living in a world built on illusions. Sweet lies, promises of a distant paradise, have been whispered into your ear since childhood, suppressing your will to live, lulling your spirit into submission and weakness. Now, you must confront a harsh truth, a roar echoing from the abyss of wisdom, Nietzsche's roar against religion. This isn't a shallow attack on faith. It's a brutal unveiling, a profound critique that cuts to the root of belief systems which have weakened the human spirit, turning people into slaves to illusions and values that despise life. Do you have the courage to face this truth directly? To tear away the veil that hides reality? Religion, in Nietzsche's eyes, wasn't a source of comfort or a path to salvation. It was a disease, a poison that paralyzed the will to live, an invisible chain shackling humanity's great potential. His hatred wasn't personal animosity, but a thorough, systematic critique of values and consequences he considered detrimental to human development. He wasn't merely an atheist. He was a moral and cultural critic who saw religion as a force resisting life and its natural, healthy values. Look at the world you're living in. You're taught that goodness is most important, that compassion is a noble virtue, that self-sacrifice will lead to a reward in the afterlife. These teachings, while seemingly lofty, are, in Nietzsche's analysis, products of weakness, of fear in the face of life. They are the whispers of those not strong enough to affirm themselves, who therefore created a system to glorify their own impotence and bind others. Religion, especially Christianity, which Nietzsche primarily focused on critiquing, performed a brutal transvaluation of all values. It transformed what is strong, noble, earthly, and self-affirming into sinful, evil. Conversely, it elevated what is weak, sickly, submissive, and life-denying into good, virtuous. Human greatness no longer resided in the strength of will, in creative ability, but in humility, endurance, and a yearning for salvation from outside. This was a direct assault on human nature, turning it into something needing to be tamed and corrected. So do you realize that the sweet promises of a heaven or eternal happiness are, in fact, a way for people to abdicate responsibility for their current lives? Do you see that the worship of a transcendent God has turned people into slaves, constantly seeking approval and forgiveness instead of forging their own destiny? Nietzsche didn't want you to find comfort in his words. He wanted you to awaken, to see the harsh truth about the invisible chains religion has woven. He wanted you to break them, so that from the ruins of those empty promises, you would rebuild meaning for yourself, becoming the master of your own life. To understand why Nietzsche hated religion, you must look at what he considered the core and most noble drive of all life, the will to power, Wille zur Macht. This isn't a desire for political domination or crude violence, as many mistakenly believe. The will to power is the innate instinct of every living being to develop, to overcome oneself, to increase one's inner strength, to affirm and expand one's existence. Every action, from a tree reaching for light to an artist creating a masterpiece, from an athlete striving to break a record to a scientist unraveling mysteries, all are manifestations of the will to power. It is the primal force that drives all life to ascend and become more than it is. Nietzsche argued that religion, especially Christianity, has systematically weakened the will to power in humans. It taught people to renounce individual will, to abandon self-mastery in order to submit to a supreme power, a divine will, a creator from outside. Instead of encouraging you to affirm yourself, to live fully with your instincts and potential, religion promoted humility to the point of self-abasement, meekness, and the renunciation of this world and all earthly desires to seek a reward in the afterlife, a life after death. Consider the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, or blessed are those who mourn. Religion glorified weakness, sickness, endurance. It transformed flaws, impotence into virtues, and turned strength, joy, earthliness, and the desire for a full life into sin. A wealthy, healthy person, full of will to live, daring to assert themselves, might be considered arrogant, greedy, or sinful if they didn't renounce their possessions, or power if they didn't bow to the church's rules. Conversely, a poor, sick, meek, resigned person was promised a heaven after death, a justice in the hereafter. This is the transvaluation of all values that Nietzsche denounced as toxic and anti-natural. Religion inverted all natural values of life, turning what are signs of strong life, of noble spirit, into evil, sin, something to be suppressed. And what are signs of weakness, cowardice, sickness, and resignation became good, virtuous, worthy of praise. The purpose of this inversion wasn't to elevate humanity, but to control the strong, to domesticate free spirits, and to maintain a social order where the weak and sick could feel safe and powerful through their numbers. It was a revenge of the weak against the strong. Nietzsche called this slave morality. This morality wasn't created by strong, self-reliant individuals, the masters of life, but by the weak, who harbored resentment towards the strong, unable to overcome difficulties themselves, unable to match the strength and excellence of others. They created a system of values to condemn those capable of doing so. They transformed their impotence into virtue and the strength of others into sin. For example, a worker feels envious of a rich and successful boss, but instead of trying to learn, rise, or take risks to improve their situation, they comfort themselves with the thought that money is the root of all evil, and the poor, the humble will go to heaven and be blessed forever. This is slave morality, transforming envy and impotence into a false virtue, a toxic comfort that paralyzes the will to act. Another example is someone who accepts oppression, blames fate, and believes it's God's will instead of fighting to change their circumstances. Religion, in Nietzsche's analysis, became a tool to weaken people from within, making them afraid to live fully, afraid to affirm their will, afraid to dream great dreams. It instilled fear of a sin and punishment, making people constantly feel guilty, inadequate, and in need of salvation from an external force. Do you feel imprisoned by those fears? Are you abandoning your will to live, abandoning your natural desires to seek comfort in empty promises of another world, a life after death? One of the greatest and most vehemently criticized reasons by Nietzsche was religion's creation of empty promises of another world, a heaven after death, an eternal reward for those who suffer in this life. This promise, he argued, was an escape from responsibility for the present life, a betrayal of the unique, finite, and precious value of this earthly existence. Religion taught people that life on earth is merely a test, a transitional phase filled with suffering, and true happiness only comes in the afterlife, in some eternal realm. This led to a disdain for the present life, a renunciation of joy, satisfaction, and earthly experiences. Instead of living every moment to the fullest, people lived in anticipation, in empty hope for an uncertain future, a heaven that might never come. This turned life into an eternal postponement, a preparation for death rather than an affirmation of life. The salvation that religion promised was also a subtle trap. It transformed people into inherently sinful beings, always in need of forgiveness and atonement. This sense of guilt weakened the individual's will and self-confidence. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, instead of correcting their own mistakes, people relied on a savior, an external absolution, a ritual of atonement. This stripped them of their autonomy, their ability to face consequences themselves and to rise stronger after each stumble. It made weakness a virtue and submission the only path to safety. Nietzsche emphasized that religion propagated anti-naturalism. It declared war on humanity's natural, healthy, and essential instincts. Strength, pride, the desire for a full life, sensuality. It deemed these instincts sinful, needing to be restrained, suppressed, even annihilated to achieve spiritual purity. The goal was to create a weak, easily controlled human being, one suited for slave morality, a person who feared life and sought liberation from it. For example, a young person has an intense desire for personal success, to explore the world, to enjoy life's pleasures, to experience love. But religion might teach them that these desires are greedy, arrogant, earthly lusts, that they should abandon material desires to focus on spiritual life, on sacrifice. This distorted their spirit, weakened their will to power, and turned them into a faint shadow of themselves, living in torment and internal contradiction. Nietzsche also criticized religion because it prevented people from achieving amor fati, love of fate, the unconditional acceptance and love of all of life, including its suffering and joy. Religion promised an escape from suffering, a life without hardship in heaven. This prevented people from accepting the dark sides of life, from transforming suffering into strength, from finding meaning in their very challenges. They sought to escape rather than to confront. By promising a perfect world after death, a paradise where all suffering ends, religion created a subtle hatred for the present life, a disdain for what exists. It turned this life into a valley of tears, a place to escape from, a burden to endure. Nietzsche wanted people to love this life unconditionally, with all its brutality and beauty, without needing any promises of a reward in another world, without any reason beyond its very existence. Are you living in anticipation of a reward in the afterlife? Are you suppressing your natural instincts for fear of sin? If so, you are a victim of empty promises, and your spirit is being eroded by anti-naturalism, being held back from its latent greatness. Nietzsche's declaration, "God is dead," is one of the most shocking and misunderstood statements in the history of Western philosophy. It wasn't a literal denial of God's existence or a call for atheism. Rather, it was a profound realization, a cultural diagnosis of the inevitable collapse of metaphysical and religious values that had been the foundation of Western civilization for centuries. Nietzsche recognized that faith in God, which had been the bedrock of all moral values, all righteousness, all purpose, and all meaning in life for centuries, was gradually losing its power, losing its grip on humanity. The rapid development of science, the rise of reason and critical thinking, and the expansion of secularism had eroded this faith from within. People no longer believed in a pre-established cosmic order created by a supreme being, an absolute morality bestowed from above, or a grand plan they simply needed to follow. That faith had died in the minds and hearts of many. whether they consciously realized it or not. The inevitable and undeniable consequence of the death of God was the emergence of nihilism. When there is no longer an objective source of meaning, no solid moral pillar, all values become relative, all beliefs become groundless, and life itself seems to lose its purpose, becoming empty and cold. People fall into a state of bewilderment, meaninglessness, which can lead to extreme pessimism, despair, or even self-destruction. Nietzsche didn't praise nihilism. He saw it as a crisis, a serious pathological state that humanity had to endure. But he also saw in it a great opportunity, a moment of ultimate liberation. When all old values collapse, an empty space is created, a void that allows humans to forge new values for themselves, values that are stronger, more authentic, and more aligned with life itself. He clearly distinguished between two forms of reaction to nihilism: passive nihilism and active nihilism. Passive nihilism is a complete surrender to meaninglessness. Those who fall into this state become indifferent, depressed, deeply pessimistic, losing all motivation to act or create. They are the last men whom Nietzsche despised. Those who seek only small comforts and security, material convenience, losing all great aspirations, all superior capabilities. They say, everything is meaningless, so why bother trying? Why suffer? Just get through the day. This is a decaying spirit, a form of slow spiritual suicide. Active nihilism is the courageous acceptance of the collapse of old values. Not to collapse oneself, but to free oneself from those chains and to create new meaning. It is the courage to face the void, to confront the naked truth of existence, and to dare to rebuild from the ruins, from the very foundation of meaninglessness. They say, everything is meaningless, so I will create my own meaning. I will be the architect, the definer. This is a warrior's spirit, a vibrant spirit. Nietzsche wanted you not to be drawn into passive nihilism, not to become a last man. He wanted you to accept the truth that there is no preordained meaning for your life, but that this very fact is the ultimate liberation. You are no longer bound by old definitions, outdated expectations. You have the power to create meaning for your existence, a meaning that is authentic and uniquely yours. This is a tremendous burden because it places all responsibility on your shoulders. But it is also an invaluable privilege. You are no longer a puppet of any force, divine or societal. You are the architect, the artist, the shaper of your own destiny, with the absolute power to create the masterpiece of your life. Are you ready to accept the death of God? To accept the emptiness of nihilism? And from there, to create a world of meaning of your own, a world stronger, more unique, more authentic. To overcome nihilism and the weakening effects of religion, Nietzsche put forth the ideal of the overman, Übermensch. The overman is not a specific existing person, a superior race, or a mythical figure with superhuman powers. It is a goal, an ideal that each individual can strive towards through a process of continuous self-overcoming. The overman is the one who has bravely accepted the death of God and created new values for their life, for themselves. The path to becoming the overman isn't about following existing rules, ancient dogmas, but about creating one's own rules. It requires a profound spiritual transformation, a process of soul metamorphosis, described by Nietzsche through three metamorphoses of the spirit. The camel, the spirit that patiently and submissively carries the burdens of tradition, morality, and social rules. This is the stage of learning and obedience, of accumulating strength and knowledge. Although these burdens can sometimes feel illogical and oppressive. This stage is necessary for you to understand what you're carrying. But you must not remain there forever. The lion. The rebellious spirit, daring to say no to the dragon of thou shalt, meaning external rules and imposed values, old dogmas, societal prejudices. The lion breaks chains to gain freedom, to create empty space for creation. This is the stage of denying what no longer serves your growth. The child. The innocently creative spirit, living entirely in the present, playing with life and creating new values without being bound by the past or resentment. The child embodies the will to power in its purest form. The will to create, to affirm oneself joyfully. The overman is the one who has completed all three of these metamorphoses. They are no longer held back by slave morality or the empty promises of religion. They live a full, powerful, and authentic life, needing no approval or excuse from anyone. Life affirmation is the foundation of the overman. Instead of turning away from this world to seek a luxurious heaven, an eternal paradise in an afterlife, the overman embraces life with all its facets, including joy and sorrow, success and failure, beauty and brutality, logic and absurdity. This is amor fati, love of fate. Not just accepting, but intensely loving everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen in one's life. Amor fati is not passive resignation to fate. It is an intense love for existence, an ability to transform every tragedy into creative material, every scar into a mark of strength, every difficulty into motivation for ascent. An artist doesn't lament the limitations of their material. They transform them into a unique and essential part of the work. Similarly, the overman transforms all suffering, all failures, into an indispensable part of their life's masterpiece, because they realize that these very things have forged and shaped them. The ultimate and most demanding challenge of the overman is the idea of eternal recurrence. Nietzsche posed this thought experiment. Are you willing to live this life exactly as it has occurred? With every tiny detail, every ultimate pain, every joyful exhilaration, every brilliant success, every bitter failure, countless times and forever. The overman will answer, yes, with joyful affirmation. Because they have lived a life so full, authentic, and meaningful that they crave to experience it countless times, moment by moment. This is not a physical prediction, but a spiritual measure of how much you love your life and how responsibly you have lived it. If you can say yes to eternal recurrence, it's a sign of a strong will that has fully affirmed life. Becoming the overman is a ceaseless journey, a continuous process of self-overcoming, a battle with one's own limitations and weaknesses. It demands ultimate courage to face meaninglessness, relentless strength to create meaning, and intense love to accept life completely without fear. Do you dare to embark on this path? Do you dare to become the overman of your own life, who has overcome the darkness of nihilism to light their own way, needing no light from empty promises? Conclusion. The call to awakening and individual creation. You have seen why Nietzsche hated religion, not because it was faith, but because he saw it as a force that weakened the will to live, a tool that created slave morality, and an empty promise that defied the present life. You have faced the death of God and the emergence of nihilism, an abyss full of challenges, yet also opportunities. And you have understood the path of the overman, the path of self-overcoming and life affirmation. Now, the question is no longer why, but what will you do? Will you continue clinging to the sweet lies of empty promises, letting your spirit be chained by slave morality, lulled into false comfort? Will you surrender to the emptiness of passive nihilism, becoming a hopeless, last man, a faint shadow in the stream of life? Or will you dare to accept the harsh truth, stand amidst the ruins, and rebuild the meaning of your life yourself? A meaning that is strong, authentic, and entirely yours? This is an urgent call to your will, a challenge to the very core of your being. The path to freedom, to greatness, is not an easy one, not a path strewn with roses. It demands ultimate courage to break what is old and no longer serves you, iron resilience to build what has never existed, and an intense love for life, no matter how harsh it may be. Remember that meaning isn't something to be found in a distant places or granted by a transcendent power. Meaning is an action. It is created every day, every hour, every moment, through the affirmation of your will, through the choices you make, through how you face difficulties and how you transform them into strength and motivation to rise. You have the potential to become the greatest artist, the artist of your own life. You can carve your destiny, create your own values, and live a life authentic to every breath, every heartbeat, unchained by any dogma or empty promise. Don't wait for salvation from outside. Don't seek comfort in illusions. Seek strength within yourself, in your relentless inner will to power. Act, create, love this life unconditionally. Become your own overman, a living testament that even when all values collapse, humanity can still rise and create its own magnificent meaning. Do you dare to accept this great challenge? Do you dare to become the master of your life, transcending empty promises and building a unique masterpiece? The choice is yours, and that choice will shape you, shape your existence forever.